I invite now the next participating delegation, the Gambia, to make its oral statement before the court. I thus call upon His Excellency Mr. Dawda A to take the floor.
Mr. President, honorable members of the court, it is an honor for me to appear before you to present the Republic of the Gambia in these essential advisory opinion proceedings. As was the case with the Gambia's written statement, my oral submission today focuses on the second question presented to the court regarding the legal status of the occupation and the legal consequences that arise therefrom. The preamble of the UN Charter reminds us the fundamental goals of our international system: to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war, to reaffirm faith in fundamental human rights and the dignity and worth of human persons, in the equal rights of men and women and of nations large and small, to establish conditions under which justice and respect for the obligations arising from treaties and other sources of international law can be maintained, and to promote social progress, better standards of life, in large freedom. Mr. President, members of the court, notwithstanding the great resources invested by the international community at large, none of these goals have been achieved for the Palestinian people. None of them. And none of these goals can be achieved for the Palestinian people until Israel's illegal occupation of the Palestinian territories is brought to an end. My remarks today will focus on 3 points. First, I will discuss the fact that a belligerent occupation can be illegal per se under certain circumstances. Second, I will set forth 3 reasons why Israel's prolonged occupation of the Palestinian territories is illegal, a view shared by a substantial majority of the states participating in these proceedings. Third, I will conclude by emphasizing the essential role of this court in declaring that Israel's occupation is illegal and must be brought to an end immediately. As the court knows quite well, the international system is based on certain fundamental principles of law, which includes peremptory norms of international law or jus cogent norms. Adherence to these norms is not subject to derogation, and compliance with them is owed erga omnes to the international community as a whole. Some of the recognized jus cogent norms include prohibition of aggression, prohibition of genocide, the prohibition of apartheid, and the right to self-determination. If a particular action of a state violates one or more jus cogent norms, that action is illegal under international law. Any state may invoke the responsibility of that state for such a violation and seek an immediate end to it. This is fundamentally the situation regarding Israel's occupation in the Palestinian territories. The international community, collectively over many years, has found Israel's occupation of the Palestinian territories to be illegal, among other reasons on account of its violations of multiple jus cogent norms. And collectively, we have invoked Israel's responsibility in that regard to end the occupation. Mr. President, at least one state in the course of these proceedings has suggested that an occupation under international law cannot be illegal under any circumstances. This argument posits that an occupation exists, therefore it's legal. The proposition is unfounded in international law and fails for several reasons. First, this argument confuses jus in bello and completely ignores the jus ad bellum. As the court is well aware, international humanitarian law and the jus in bello is the body of law that governs the ways which warfare can be conducted. It includes within it the law of occupation, a body of rules regulating the conduct of occupying power. It is indeed true that the obligations under jus in bello, as they relate to an occupation, persist throughout the pendency of the occupation. But separate from jus in bello is the jus ad bellum, or the conditions under which state may resort to armed force. It is the jus ad bellum that addresses the legality of use of force, including an occupation, which is maintained by ongoing use of force. Article 2(4) of the UN Charter prohibits the threat or use of force in any manner inconsistent with the purpose of the United Nations. The only exceptions to this prohibition are the very narrow circumstances of the force authorized by the UN Security Council or self-defense under Article 15 of the Charter. Any use of force outside of these narrow exceptions, that is, any annexation or occupation of territory arising from an act of aggression or otherwise unlawful use of force, is illegal. Any use of force that is unnecessary, disproportionate to the threat against which it is exercised, is also illegal under jus ad bellum. Second, the proposition that an occupation exists, therefore it is legal, also ignores the existence and implications of jus cogent norms going beyond the jus ad bellum. If an occupation inherently violates one or more jus cogent norms, then it is illegal as a whole, and the occupying power's responsibility for that violation can be invoked in order to bring the violation to an end. The occupying power's ongoing obligation under international humanitarian law do not and cannot preclude the wrongfulness of jus cogent violations inherent in the occupation itself. For example, the argument that occupations are inherently legal, if adopted, would directly conflict with and undermine the prohibition on the annexation of territory. Any state that wanted to de facto annex a territory could do so by indefinitely occupying that territory, but not formally incorporating it within its borders. It is the same with the jus cogent norms of the rights of self-determination. Simply put, flagrant violations of international law cannot be brushed aside by the fig leaf of occupation. Finally, the thesis that an occupation exists, therefore it is legal, also ignores the fact that the court has determined occupations to be unlawful in the past. As discussed in the Gambia's written statement, this was the case regarding South Africa's occupation of Namibia without title, and regarding Uganda's occupation of the Congolese province of Ituri. The UN Security Council and the General Assembly have characterized occupation resulting from unlawful uses of force to be illegal as well. In sum, a belligerent occupation can be illegal per se if it violates the jus ad bellum and other jus cogent norms. Mr. President, members of the court, the Gambia will highlight 3 reasons why Israel's prolonged occupation of the Palestinian territories is illegal. All 3 of these reasons, the right of self-determination, the prohibition on apartheid, and the jus ad bellum, reflect obligations rooted in jus cogent norms. This conclusion of illegality is shared by a substantial majority of the participants in these proceedings, many for the same reasons as the Gambia. First, Israel's occupation violates the right to Palestinian people to self-determination and is therefore illegal. Their government's right of self-determination is one of the essential principles of contemporary international law and jus cogent norm enshrined in the UN Charter. The court has before its extensive and uncontested fact-finding, the court has before it extensive and uncontested fact-finding multiple UN mandate holders, including the Independent International Commission of Inquiry on Occupied Palestinian Territory and the many reports of the Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in Palestinian territories occupied since 1967. These reports have been produced by independent UN mandate holders who engage in extensive fact-finding, utilizing multiple sources of evidence. The court should accept these reports as conclusive and convincing evidence of Israel's long-standing, ongoing, and indefinite infringement on the right of self-determination for the Palestinian people. Indeed, there is no end in sight to Israel's occupation. Already extending over 56 years, Israel's current leadership boasts with pride its long-standing efforts to prevent the creation of an independent Palestinian state. As reported by the UN Special Rapporteur, Israel's occupation violates Palestinians' ability to organize themselves as a people, free from alien domination and control. No derogation is permitted from respecting the right of the Palestinian people to self-determination. There is no escaping the conclusion that Israel's occupation is illegal for violating the right of the Palestinian people to self-determination, and that it must expeditiously be brought to an end. Second, Israel's ongoing occupation of the Palestinian territories is also illegal because it amounts to a regime of apartheid, the prohibition of which is a peremptory norm of international law. This court has described apartheid as flagrant violation of purposes and principles of the Charter. Once again, the court has before it extensive, credible and independent fact-finding demonstrating conclusively that Israel has imposed an apartheid reality in the Palestinian territories. This is clear in the reporting of the UN Special Rapporteur, who concluded that Israel has imposed upon Palestine an apartheid reality in a post-apartheid world. This is also reflected in the findings of the Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. Senior international leaders like Ban Ki-moon, Desmond Tutu, and former Israeli officials, including former Attorney General, former Director of Israel's Intelligence Service, Sin Bet, and former Ambassador of Israel to South Africa, have also concluded that Israel's occupation constitutes a regime of apartheid. The most credible non-government human rights organizations that report on the situation in the occupied Palestinian territory have also concluded that the occupation is, in fact, and in law, apartheid regime. A sober review of the uncontroverted evidence convincingly shows that the occupation is a regime of apartheid. As such, Israel's occupation of the Palestinian territories is illegal and must urgently be brought to an end. Third, Israel's 56-year occupation of Palestinian territories violates the laws on the use of force, jus ad bellum, and is illegal for that reason as well. As discussed earlier, the prohibition on the threat and use of force as a jus cogent norm, even then resort to force is justified by self-defense in response to an armed attack. The particular force used may still be illegal if it is unnecessary or disproportionate to the threat against which it is exercised. Israel launched the June 1967 war that led to its occupation of the Palestinian territory. After its surprise attack initiating the war, Israel occupied all remaining Palestinian territory in the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, the Gaza Strip, as well as Syria, Golan Heights, and Egypt in Sinai Peninsula, effectively tripling the size of the territory under its control. Since this use of force was not taken in response to an armed attack and was not necessary or proportionate even if it had been, the occupation was flagrant violation of the laws of the use of force from the onset. Furthermore, even if the occupation of the Palestinian territories were lawful at one time, its continuation for more than 5 decades means that it could not possibly still be lawful today. First, the use of force in self-defense is only justified within the strict confines laid down in Article 51 of the Charter, and does not allow the use of force by a state to protect perceived security interests beyond those parameters. As such, essentially, preventive use of force are beyond the scope of Article 51. Second, as clarified in the World Advisory Opinion, Secondly, as clarified in the World Advisory Opinion, Article 51 does not apply to situations involving conduct taken in response to purported threats emanating from the within occupied territory. Israel therefore cannot justify its occupation as a response to illegal threats emanating from within the occupied Palestinian territory itself. Israel's ongoing occupation of the Palestinian territories also violates the jus ad bellum because its maintenance is unnecessary and disproportionate. It has been necessary for Israel to maintain its occupation since 1967 for over 56 years. Moreover, Israel also cannot possibly justify its settlements upon an annexation of occupied territory as a necessary response to any perceived threat, not to mention the myriad of rights violations that are intrinsic to the occupation. By settling and annexing occupied territory, Israel has acted unnecessarily in using force. Israel's prolonged occupation is also wholly disproportionate to any legitimate aim. Israel's occupation of the entirety of the Palestinian territories, long after the period in which they presumed armed attack could reasonably be contemplated, makes it even more disproportionate now. And the manner in which the occupation has been conducted, including the establishment of an apartheid regime, renders the occupation disproportionate as well. In sum, Israel's decades-long occupation violates the jus ad bellum and is therefore illegal. Mr. President, members of the court, in the almost 20 years since the world advisory opinion, Israel has only deepened the occupation. Israel has annexed more territory and expanded its illegal settlements. It has further fragmented the Palestinian territory. In Gaza, Israel has decimated the territory and the Palestinian population there. In the territories overall, Israel has entrenched an apartheid regime. The Palestinian people continue to be deprived of their right to self-determination indefinitely. And all the while, there is no justification under international law for Israel's continued use of force to maintain the occupation, if there ever was one to begin with. Mr. President, members of the court, I remind us of the fundamental goals of the United Nations that I recited at the beginning of my remarks. If we are to ever achieve any of those goals in regard to the Palestinian people, then this court must play its role in robustly answering the question posed by the General Assembly. As to the second question posed, the Gambia submits that the court should find Israel's occupation of the Palestinian territories is illegal per se for all of the reasons discussed. And the Gambia further submits that the court should find that Israel, all other states and the United Nations are under an obligation to bring about an end to Israel's occupation immediately or at least as rapidly as possible. Thank you, Mr. President, members of the court, for your kind attention.
I thank the delegation of the Gambia for its presentation